Hello friend, let's start the review of Worshippers of Cthulhu right away. This is a city-building strategy game. It's quite a popular genre, but not everyone likes it. I was personally interested in getting to know the game. Here are my impressions. Despite the fact that the theme of the game was a bit alarming, I decided to play it anyway. The idea is that you have to complete tasks, build a city, collect resources, and eventually come to the point where you have to wake Cthulhu from hibernation. I expected this game to have a fanatical flavor, but not so much. The first thing that unpleasantly struck me was the performance of rites with a knife. In the game, you had to cut symbols on the backs of fanatics to get an increase in the fanaticism of the entire population. This is somehow unpleasant. In my personal opinion, even in such a theme, I would like to see no such overtly fanatical scenes. That's why I immediately give -1 point for this. I will also give the next minus for a similar action. A little later in the game, another ritual will open up where you need to burn fanatics. It looks creepy, and the soundtrack of these scenes shocked me. Moreover, if you don't turn off Cthulhu's patience scale, you simply won't be able to complete all the tasks without performing these rites. It turns out that they must be performed in the game. Perhaps for real fanatics it would be cool. But I personally give -1 point for such actions. What do we have next? I haven't played such games for a long time, and in general, I went through the first chapter getting acquainted with the game. While playing the second chapter, my interest in the game awakened. I was interested not so much in the plot as in the process of accumulating resources and thinking through the strategy of how to do it right. And as soon as I became interested in the game, it turned out that there was nothing further. As of October 2024, we have only 2 chapters available. The first thing that comes to mind is that the developers decided to introduce the players to their product and make a sequel only if the game pays off economically. As a player, I don't like this strategy. If I started playing a game, I want to play it to the end if I like it, not to get acquainted and wait, and then remember what happened and how it was played. I give this decision -1 point. To be honest, I don't know if this is common in games of this genre, but I didn't like the fact that the chapter could be completed before completing other tasks. In the second chapter, I still had open tasks. I wanted to finish them, but the main task was completed and I was offered to go to the main map. I thought that I would continue to play other chapters, but they were not there, and now I either have to start over or forget about the game. Of course, I could have stayed on the map and finished all the tasks. I know that now, but I didn't know it then, and I didn't like the fact that you can't return from the main map to any chapter and finish its progress. I give it -1 point. Speaking of the game's atmosphere, all those rituals for which I've already given minus points annoyed me. What I would like to see is more cutscenes and actions of Cthulhu himself, as a cult image. I simply missed the Cthulhu theme in the first 2 chapters. When we receive a blessing, in the game we create statuettes that are sacrificed, and then tentacles pop out of the abyss and take the statuettes. That's all there was to the theme. For such a poor design of the Cthulhu theme, I give -1 point. The game received quite a few minuses from me, but I'm being honest about my feelings. I didn't like Cthulhu's patience scale. If you turn it off, the game becomes a bit boring. If you don't turn it off, you simply don't have a chance not to lose. Only with experience can you manage to win this race. And in my opinion, although the game has a difficulty setting, the main issue with the Cthulhu scale is not optimally solved. Its absence is annoying. Its presence is even more annoying. That's the paradox. It seems that the balance in this scale is not quite right. Maybe experienced players can handle it easily, but for me, it was definitely -1 point. And I'll give the last minus point for the monotony of the missions. I understand that it's hard to find a lot of variety in this genre, but we live in the age of new games. Think about what can be done here to make each mission more interesting than the last. So far, it all boils down to monotonous resource gathering. There is no peculiarity in each chapter. In fact, they can't even be called chapters at all. You start each island from the beginning, with standard actions, and only at the end is something new added because you only need other resources. Very monotonous and boring. I give -1 point for the lack of creative ideas. Well, let's finish with the minuses. What attracted me was the beautiful color scheme. I personally like the green color, and the game is made in such an emerald shade. I mean, the picture is very nice. There is a good solution with the color. By the way, that's the only reason I bought this game and started playing it. I give it +1 point. Next, let's talk about the graphics. Of course, now we are not surprised by the graphic content of the game, and here it is quite simple, but all the details are very clear. It was interesting for me to zoom in on the game and look at the details of each building, each process. Everything is done neatly, beautifully, and stylishly. Oddly enough, I'll also give +1 point for the graphics. When I started playing, I was worried about how I would cope and whether I would master the game. I wondered if it would be too complicated for me in terms of not understanding what to do. The developers are really good here. Even if you are not a master of this genre and are playing a similar strategy for the first time, a fairly detailed learning stage is prepared for you. Information windows explain in detail and clearly what you need to do and how it works. In addition to the text, there is a graphical accompaniment. I give +1 point for learning the game. Of course, experienced players and fans of this genre are more active in figuring out how to play and may not be interested in the easier version of the game. That's why it's really cool that you can choose the difficulty level in the game. If you are a beginner, play the game a few times on easy difficulty, and when you learn and understand all the nuances, make your game more interesting with a different difficulty level. I realize that this is a common option and almost all games have it, but first of all, I give +1 point for having it. Another rather trivial bonus that is present in every game you buy on Steam is the accumulation of achievements. No matter what anyone says, it's still interesting. And although almost all the achievements in the game are quite simple and you need to build a certain number of buildings or sink a certain number of enemy ships, the essence is still good. It's worth saying that there are quite unique achievements that are not so easy to get. And a very small percentage of players have them. Therefore, I give +1 point for various achievements. What I really liked was summoning monsters. I even turn a blind eye to how it's done, even though I'm not crazy about it. But it was the decision to add sea battles with monsters. It's interesting. It really distracted me from the boring resource accumulation system. I would even like to see this naval exploration system be even more developed. But overall, +1 point. Speaking of the game, it is impossible not to discuss the process of accumulating resources. Everything is simple. I would say trite. There are warehouses, I extract resources, there are resources that are made from other resources. The usual hierarchy. But in general, I see a certain balance in the accumulation of resources, and there is no unpleasant difficulty in getting something from the resources. That is, the balance is really well thought out. Even the surplus resources can be used to burn at the stake, thus increasing the amount of faith. I give +1 point for the balance of resources. Perhaps that's all that can be said about this game. At least for now. Perhaps later, when other chapters are added, if this is done, there will be new nuances. Whether they are positive or negative is another question. It is not a fact that I will return to this game in the next sequel. I don't like such returns. I had just started to enjoy the game, and then the content ended. I didn't have time to fall in love with the game, so that I would want to wait for the sequel and play it. But in general, the second chapter aroused the beginning of my interest. If it wasn't for the abrupt ending, I would have played on. In general, the game makes a positive impression, so I give it a final +1 point. What we have in the end. Taking into account all the pros and cons, the game got me only +1 point. Of course, it's better than 0, and even better than being in the red. Still, the pros outweigh the cons, and the main problem is that the game is cut down to the ears of the chapters, and there is no content. I wish the development team success. It is a difficult path, and they are really doing something interesting, and it definitely makes sense. But it is very difficult to satisfy the modern player. That is why we have what we have now. And if you liked my review, I advise you to take a look at the review of another game. This is a review about a game that made a lot of noise in the industry, and which received very different ratings from critics. This is a review of Black Myth Wukong. Have a nice watch.